Have you ever wondered why God seems to work so quietly in your life, shaping you through ordinary moments instead of dramatic signs? Have you ever felt that your daily routine hides a deeper purpose you cannot yet fully see? And have you ever sensed that being chosen by God is less about being extraordinary and more about being faithfully ordinary? Saint Faustina understood this mystery with striking clarity. In her spiritual experience, God did not form souls primarily through rare visions or dramatic trials, but through the hidden, repetitive, and often unnoticed details of everyday life. What many fail to understand is that God's deepest work usually happens where life feels most normal. Saint Faustina Kowalska once said, "God does not form his chosen ones in moments of glory. He forms them in the quiet faithfulness of ordinary life." Subscribe if you wish to understand how God is shaping you, even when nothing extraordinary seems to be happening. Saint Faustina's spiritual path reveals something that challenges modern expectations. God's chosen are not primarily shaped by visibility, success, or spiritual excitement. They are shaped by fidelity in small things, by obedience in simple duties, and by surrender in moments that seem spiritually insignificant. She wrote often about how God used her daily responsibilities, kitchen work, cleaning, illness, misunderstandings, fatigue, as instruments of deep interior transformation. To the world, these moments looked meaningless. To God, they were sacred tools. Ordinary life is not a distraction from God's plan. It is the environment where God's plan unfolds. This is what few understand. Many people wait for God to act in big ways, a breakthrough, a sign, a dramatic calling. But St. Faustina shows that God usually chooses a quieter method. He forms the soul through consistency, through hidden sacrifices, through small obediences, through silent trust. Imagine a simple day. You wake up, you go to work, you answer messages, you face small frustrations, you repeat familiar tasks. Nothing feels spiritual, nothing feels significant. And yet, this is where God is working, not loudly, not visibly, but deeply. Saint Faustina recognized that the soul is shaped not by what it feels, but by what it offers. Each ordinary task becomes a place of formation when it is done with love and surrender. Each irritation becomes a lesson in patience. Each delay becomes a lesson in trust. Each hidden effort becomes a seed of grace. God forms the chosen not by removing them from ordinary life, but by sanctifying ordinary life from within. This is why many misunderstand divine formation. They expect clarity, intensity, and visible progress, but God often prefers obscurity, repetition, and faithfulness. He forms depth where the world sees nothing. Ask yourself quietly, where has your life felt boring, repetitive, or unnoticed? Where have you thought nothing important is happening here? Where have you wished for something bigger, clearer, more dramatic? Saint Faustina would gently answer, this is exactly where God is working. The chosen are not always marked by extraordinary experiences. They are marked by extraordinary faithfulness in ordinary circumstances. God builds saints not on platforms, but in kitchens, offices, sickbeds, long corridors, and quiet hearts. God's choice to form souls through ordinary life is not accidental. Saint Faustina understood that the hiddenness of daily life is one of God's most powerful spiritual tools. What feels repetitive, unnoticed, or even frustrating to the soul is often precisely what allows God to shape the heart most deeply. Why? Because ordinary life strips away illusion. In moments of visibility or spiritual excitement, it is easy for the soul to become attached to feelings, recognition, or results, but in ordinary life there is nothing to lean on except God himself. No applause, no confirmation, no emotional reward, only quiet fidelity. Saint Faustina wrote that God often works most powerfully when the soul feels the least, when prayer feels dry, when duties feel heavy, when love feels unnoticed. These are not signs of abandonment. They are signs of formation. In hiddenness, the soul is purified of self-seeking. Imagine a soul who only feels close to God when prayer is emotionally rich. That soul may be attached to consolation rather than to God. But a soul who continues to love, obey, and trust when nothing is felt is being formed in something much deeper, pure faith. This is why God chooses the ordinary. Ordinary life removes spiritual shortcuts. It removes emotional dependence. It removes visible markers of progress. It forces the soul to live by faith alone. Saint Faustina often described how she felt misunderstood, unseen, and spiritually dry, even while God was doing his deepest work within her. She learned that God's silence is not absence. It is an invitation to trust without evidence. In a world that values results, visibility, and achievement, this way of God feels uncomfortable. It feels slow. It feels inefficient. It feels unclear. But spiritually, it is precise. God forms endurance, humility, and purity of intention through days that look ordinary from the outside. Think of how muscles grow, not through one dramatic effort, but through repeated, small strain over time. In the same way, God builds spiritual strength through daily, unseen acts of fidelity. Each time you choose patience in traffic, each time you speak kindly when tired, each time you complete a task with love, each time you forgive quietly, each time you trust when confused. These are not small in God's eyes. They are the material he uses to form saints. Saint Faustina understood that being chosen does not mean being removed from normal life. It means allowing God to use normal life as a sacred workshop. The chosen are not exempt from repetition. They are formed by it. This also protects the soul. If God revealed all his plans clearly, the soul might grow proud, anxious, or self-focused. Hidden formation keeps the soul small, dependent, trusting, grounded. It protects humility. It preserves purity of heart. So if your life feels ordinary, repetitive, or unseen, Saint Faustina would say, do not be discouraged. Do not assume nothing is happening. Do not look for signs. God is working where you are faithful. Saint Faustina understood that God does not reserve his deepest formation for dramatic suffering alone. While great trials can shape a soul, it is often the ordinary daily sufferings, the small repeated discomforts of life, that God uses with the greatest precision. These are not heroic crosses. They are quiet ones: fatigue, misunderstandings, delays, physical weakness, emotional dryness, unanswered questions, being overlooked, being misunderstood, being required to wait. These do not look like instruments of holiness, yet Saint Faustina recognized that these small sufferings, when accepted with love, carve humility, patience, and deep trust into the soul. She wrote that God often allows these small trials not to break the soul, but to hollow it out, to make space for grace. A soul that has never been emptied cannot be filled. Ordinary suffering becomes the quiet tool God uses to create that interior space. Imagine a daily irritation. Someone speaks sharply, a plan fails, a task becomes heavier than expected. The soul feels the impulse to resist, complain, or withdraw. But if the soul chooses to accept the moment with surrender, even silently, something changes inside. The suffering itself does not sanctify. The response does. Saint Faustina understood that God is not impressed by pain. He is moved by trust. A soul that accepts daily suffering with love becomes flexible in God's hands. It stops demanding comfort. It stops demanding understanding. It stops demanding control. It becomes available. Ordinary suffering teaches the chosen soul something rare: to remain faithful when nothing feels meaningful. This is one of the deepest spiritual lessons. Many souls remain faithful when God's presence is felt strongly. Fewer remain faithful when God feels silent. Even fewer remain faithful when life feels heavy, repetitive, and unspiritual. Yet Saint Faustina learned that these are the moments when God is closest, even if hidden. She wrote of days when prayer was dry, when duties felt overwhelming, when her body was weak, and when her soul felt abandoned. Yet she continued to love, obey, and trust. These were not moments of spiritual excitement. They were moments of spiritual shaping. God uses ordinary suffering to detach the soul from emotional dependence. He teaches the soul to love him, not for how he makes it feel, but for who he is. This is how the chosen are formed, not through constant consolation, not through constant clarity, but through steady fidelity. Consider your own life. Where do you experience small daily sufferings? Where do you feel tired, misunderstood, delayed, or unseen? Where do you carry quiet burdens no one notices? Saint Faustina would say, these are not wasted moments. They are sacred places of formation. God is not only present in miracles, He is present in endurance, He is present in patience, He is present in quiet perseverance. The chosen soul learns to recognize God in the ordinary cross, not because it is dramatic, but because it is faithful. Saint Faustina also came to understand that one of God's most powerful tools for forming the chosen soul is not dramatic sacrifice, but ordinary obedience. Not obedience that draws attention, not obedience that looks heroic, but obedience in small, unnoticed decisions that shape the heart quietly and deeply. Ordinary obedience does not feel spiritual. It feels practical. It feels repetitive. It feels limiting. It feels like submission to circumstances you did not choose. Yet this is exactly why God uses it. In ordinary obedience, the soul releases control. Saint Faustina wrote that obedience purified her intentions more than any extraordinary penance. Why? Because obedience touches the root of the ego. It challenges the desire to decide, to control, to choose what feels meaningful. It invites the soul to trust God's will even when it is hidden behind human instructions, routine duties, or circumstances that seem insignificant. Imagine being asked to do something small that feels unnecessary, a task that feels beneath your abilities, a routine that feels repetitive, a responsibility that brings no recognition. The natural response of the heart is resistance. But in these moments, God is shaping something deeper than performance. He is shaping surrender. Saint Faustina recognized that obedience trained the soul to let go of personal preference. It taught her to accept God's will even when it was disguised as inconvenience. She learned that God often hides His will in ordinary structures, schedules, responsibilities, authority, and daily expectations. The chosen soul is not formed only by choosing great things. It is formed by accepting small things. Ordinary obedience trains the heart to say, "Not my will, but yours," not once, not dramatically, but daily. This daily surrender creates interior freedom. The soul no longer needs to control every outcome. It no longer needs to prove itself. It no longer needs to seek special assignments. It learns to trust that God is working even through what feels mundane. Obedience also protects the soul from illusion. Without obedience, the soul may mistake emotional inspiration for God's voice, but obedience anchors the soul in reality. It grounds spirituality in concrete life. It ensures that formation is not based on feelings, but on faithfulness. Saint Faustina learned that obedience purified her love. It stripped away the desire to be special and replaced it with the desire to be faithful. In this way, obedience formed humility, one of the deepest marks of the chosen soul. Think about your own life. Where do you resist small responsibilities? Where do you wish for different circumstances? Where do you long for something more meaningful while neglecting what is in front of you? Saint Faustina would gently remind you, God's will is often not hidden in great plans. It is hidden in today's duties. The chosen soul does not wait for extraordinary missions. It allows God to form it through ordinary faithfulness. Saint Faustina came to see that beyond suffering and obedience, God uses one final quiet instrument to complete the formation of the chosen soul: ordinary love. Not dramatic charity, not visible heroism, but small hidden acts of love that no one notices and no one applauds. This is where formation becomes most interior. Ordinary love is where intention is purified. It is easy to love when love is seen. It is easy to love when love is praised. It is easy to love when love is emotionally rewarding. But it is far more difficult and far more formative to love when no one notices, when no one thanks you, when no one understands the cost. Saint Faustina wrote that God looks more at the intention behind an act than at the act itself. A small act of love done purely for God shapes the soul more deeply than a great act done for recognition. Consider how ordinary love appears: listening when you are tired, speaking gently when you feel irritated, helping when it is inconvenient, forgiving when it still hurts, praying for someone who has wounded you, offering kindness when it is not returned. None of these look extraordinary, but spiritually they are powerful. These small acts of love slowly align the soul with the heart of God. They train the soul to love without condition, without expectation, without calculation. They detach the heart from needing results and attach it to fidelity. Saint Faustina learned that God often hides his greatest work in these moments. When love is small and hidden, pride has no place to grow. The soul becomes simpler, purer, more transparent before God. Ordinary love also reveals the true state of the heart. It is easy to love in theory. It is easy to love in prayer. It is harder to love in interruptions, in fatigue, in misunderstandings, in emotional dryness. Yet this is exactly where God forms the chosen. Each small act of hidden love is like a quiet chisel shaping the interior of the soul. Over time, the soul becomes more gentle, more patient, more flexible, more peaceful, not because it tried to change itself, but because it allowed love to reshape it. Saint Faustina understood that the chosen are not formed by intensity, but by consistency, not by how much they do, but by how faithfully they love in what is given to them. Ordinary love also heals. It heals pride, it heals self-centeredness, it heals impatience, it heals hardness of heart. It teaches the soul to move outward instead of inward, and this outward movement is essential for divine formation. A soul that turns inward becomes heavy. A soul that turns outward in love becomes light. Think about your own day. Where are you being invited to love in small ways? Where are you tempted to hold back? Where is love possible but inconvenient? Saint Faustina would say, "This is holy ground. This is formation. This is where God is shaping you." The chosen soul is not recognized by how spiritual it looks. It is recognized by how quietly it loves. When Saint Faustina looked back on her spiritual journey, she did not see a path marked by extraordinary moments, but by a quiet, consistent pattern. Ordinary life, ordinary suffering, ordinary obedience, and ordinary love, all woven together into a hidden work of God. This is how the chosen are formed, even when nothing appears remarkable from the outside. What few understand is this: God's greatest work is often his quietest work. A soul shaped in this way does not feel dramatic change. It feels slow, subtle, almost invisible. Yet over time, something unmistakable happens. The soul becomes more peaceful, more humble, more patient, more surrendered, more trusting, more free, not because it became strong, but because it stopped needing to be strong. Saint Faustina learned that God forms depth through repetition. Each ordinary day becomes a layer. Each small sacrifice becomes a mark. Each quiet yes becomes a shaping force. Over months and years, these small layers create a soul that is deeply rooted, deeply flexible, and deeply open to God. This is why many misunderstand divine formation. They look for signs, they look for breakthroughs, they look for emotional confirmation. But God is often more interested in stability than in sensation, in fidelity than in feeling, in trust than in intensity. The chosen soul is not defined by spiritual excitement. It is defined by spiritual availability, availability to be shaped, availability to be interrupted, availability to suffer quietly, availability to obey simply, availability to love without being seen. This availability is the mark of true formation. Imagine a piece of clay on a wheel. If it resists, it cracks. If it stiffens, it breaks. But if it remains soft, the hands of the potter shape it gently over time. Saint Faustina understood that God works the same way. The chosen are not the hardest. They are the softest. They remain open. They allow God to press, to shape, to refine, not in dramatic moments, but in daily ones. This also explains why so many feel unsure of God's work in their lives. They expect clarity. God gives depth. They expect movement. God gives roots. They expect evidence. God gives transformation that is felt more than seen. And this transformation is real. The soul formed this way becomes steady in difficulty, calm in confusion, gentle in tension, faithful in dryness, loving in inconvenience. These are not natural traits. They are formed traits. They are the fingerprints of God on an ordinary life. Saint Faustina would gently remind you, if your life feels ordinary, repetitive, and unseen, do not assume God is absent. Very often, that is where he is most active. He is building what will last. He is shaping what will endure. He is forming what will remain when feelings fade. The chosen are not always those who are noticed. They are those who are shaped, not on stages, not in applause, not in intensity, but in kitchens, in offices, in sick rooms, in long days, in quiet prayers, in hidden sacrifices, in small obediences, in unnoticed love. And when God finishes this hidden work, the soul may never look extraordinary, but it will be deeply His. This is the mystery few understand. God forms His chosen not by removing them from ordinary life, but by transforming ordinary life into holy ground. And if you allow Him, quietly, faithfully, patiently, He is doing this work in you right now.